we're talking about your second book,
Mm.
right? Act Two of Draco Alchemicus is now out.
Yes,
And
so
so,
here the
und
proof that they're in it, this is number one, and here's number two. So they exist physically now.
oh, that is exciting. Okay, I want to ask you about. Well, let's start right there. What is this wonderful series? You've got a couple of different people, I think, involved in it, and then I want to ask a little bit about yourself and what is this? Yeah, why is this wonderful project something that y'all are working on? So, if you would, what is the Draco Alchemicus?
So the project is a Christian allegory in Spenserian stanzas. So it's like epic mythology for the modern world. Since I teach a course on Tolkien, and I'm very attracted by his invitation for us to subcreate within the great tradition that we as Christians know that we inhabit, but we're always trying to refresh and rethink. And as a medievalist like Tolkien, I'm very aware of the difference between the layers of meaning that are available in medieval literature versus what we do in more modern storytelling. And so the Draco Alchemicus is a project to revive medieval poetic mythology for a modern audience.
What is that challenge like? That's a unique thing to be tackling, and it sounds fascinating.
So some of it is I am so steeped after, I mean, it's like my scholarship is steeped in medieval readings of scripture and in the understanding that scripture itself has multiple layers of meaning, that there's a literal sense of the text. There's an allegorical sense pointing to Christ, both in the Old Testament and obviously in the New Testament, but their relationship between the Old and the New Testaments. There's moral teachings that help us understand how we fall away from God. And then there's the invitation to transcendence, the anagogical lifting up. And in my scholarship, I've written several books which are trying to show the way medieval commentators, particularly in the monastic tradition, use things like the Psalms and the Song of Songs to talk about the love story of Christ with his mother, with Mary, but also with our souls. And the challenges, I mean, all this, that is simply baseline understanding of what the medieval reading of scriptures was like. And most modern readers tend to think of reading scripture as first and foremost a historical problem, that we're reading them for their historical context, or we're reading even the Gospels for evidence of historical past, which is one layer, which is definitely there. But we don't typically recognize the other layers. It's harder for people to see the allegory. The morality is, it's there in everybody's sermons. Like you'll hear it regularly at church, but to recognize that there's a deep tradition of prayer and asceticism and monastic discipline underlying most of those teachings, and then how far we're able to reach out into contemplation. It's one of the big things that happens in modern life is we're constantly being distracted from that level of attention. With the Draco Alchemicus itself, is the main character of the story, actually being a character. I mean, it's like this sort of challenging. We found it's challenging to write Christ because we have to have the character enter into the story, become one of the actual characters without overwhelming everybody. It's like he could work miracles constantly, and why doesn't he just do that? And sort of thinking about that. But the Draco Alchemicus, the title character, is the Satan, the dragon, the temptation that has overwhelmed all of us over time in history. And our story is about, how do we understand Christ's entry into history as a way of freeing us from sin. I forgot what you asked me. What's the challenge in doing this? It's a challenge in recovering our true Christian vision of the love that God has for us, and the reasons that we end up not being able to see him. And our dragon, our Draco Alchemicus, is the great tempter who takes the characters out of being able to recognize Christ, even though he's among them in the story.
Okay, this is fascinating because there's questions about myth I want to ask, and then there's something that you just said right there. Over this past couple of weeks, I've been thinking or learning about how do you call them spiritual legalities, and how the good things that are in the cosmos will never come and overwhelm our sense of freedom, whereas the evil ones definitely will. But then the evil ones are also very careful because they know if they move too fast or too aggressively, they can get smacked down and they'll lose any ground gained. I'm thinking like you're talking about how do you create a Christ figure? And maybe that's going to be my next question. How do you create a Christ figure that isn't overt and overwhelming and delightful like Aslan, but actually collaborates more with the human freedom? Because that's actually an essential part of like this whole thing that we're going through, the fact that our freedom and our involvement with this process of holiness matters. So there's my question. How do you work with this figure of Christ in a story? I think as Christian authors, we struggle with this a lot. How are
Right.
you solving that?
So the prime structure that we've given the story is that which the Song of Songs commentaries give, that God is the lover, the bridegroom in the story, and his bride has been seduced away or stolen away by a thief, and he has to enter into the story to rescue her. So in our story our Christ figure simply incarnates out of a cloud of pigeons, which we were pretty happy with as a mythological like frame for. I mean, we didn't want to just reproduce the incarnation as through the Annunciation and through Mary, but we needed to show that he takes on flesh through this spirit and spirit, and he manifests on the shores of this city that he then enters into. So we're being pretty blunt with the mythology there, that Christ enters into the city of light, the city of the world, which we've put on the water, right? So it's a like port city, and there's a lot of like ship imagery in our story, that the great temptation of the city. And if you read Revelation, a lot of what we're doing is we're just straight up really reading the scriptures very closely and then using those as hints to how to portray our setting and our characters. The city itself is the city that's described in Revelation as Babylon, right? It has all the merchants coming to it. It has, they bring precious wares. It's a precious city of spice, right? And then you realize our main allegory is this is the world that we're trapped in now, of the imperial domination of our market economy. But so he's entered into the city, and the first place he ends up is a casino, which is also a pretty heavy-handed allegory for the way we're constantly trying to gamble our way into fortune. And the first character he meets is Eliza Drake, our whore of Babylon, right? And she says, I'm here all the time. I can show you the ropes, as it were. And they go and they encounter a newlywed couple who are betting on the horses. This is not going to go well for the newlyweds because Eliza tempts them with knowledge. She tempts them with the certainty that, well, you've done so well on your betting on this horse race now. But you want to have children. Here's your guarantee, right? And then you realize that we've dropped you mythologically into a story of all of the temptations of our modernity, which is insurance policies and gambling for security, trying desperately to be absolutely in control of everything. As we say, this does not end well for the couple. And there's some interesting ways that we play with them about how, as a masculine and a feminine, they make their arguments about how to bet and whether or not to make the bet that Eliza is suggesting to them. And then the second part of the first book, we introduce the other characters who are chosen by a magician at a magic show to sort of enter into this wheel of fortune and test themselves. And over the course of the story, you're going to find out these additional characters. There are 6 of them, plus there's 6 of them. They have very interesting properties that show certain kinds of powers that they have, but they also have backstories, which is what they tell in Act Two, of industry and science and tradition, war, and so forth. That you're starting to recognize that that they have a certain celestial quality themselves that we're trying to show. It's like we've shown our Christ figure enter into the story, enter into our world, into time. A lot of the layers of the story are kind of time travel problems that hopefully we're showing the reader how we get trapped by it, because all of these characters are meant to be appealing, right? When our Dominic, he's Dominic Van Demonium, and his story is about industry and wanting to build great things and such. He should be like appealing and sort of grandiose. And over the course of the story, we're going to find out how each of them is caught up in their own desires by the promises that the dragon can make. Our real challenge for showing the Christ figure is, they're going to have creation turns on its creator. The creation is going to have to turn on him and kill him. But if you've got God as your interlocutor, how do you show both, the way in which he would speak as Jesus does in his incarnation to the people of the city and to his creation? I'd say as Christian storytellers, we're starting from the place where medieval exegesis does, with there is a story that we're in. It's from creation to Revelation. It's got pieces of it in its characters in the Song of Songs and the Psalms and such. And yet we're also trying to tie it into our contemporary temptations and desire to conquer time.
What a fascinating, I love that definition of myth, where you go from creation to Revelation, and then it's engaging in our modern day. I think that's
right.
That's a massive reason why I've wanted to pick up myth, or at least not include not at least, sorry. I want to include myth as like one of the top 4 things that we talk about with legend fiction and so on. As a medievalist who teaches a course on Tolkien, like I wish I could go to your classes, what is it about myth that is so important, especially this myth of the great true myth of Christ that re-engages in time and space and culture and so on? And it's so important to you that you're obviously turning it into this multi-episode series to engage with this. Why is that so important? And we just don't understand it. We don't get it, most of us.
Well, in my Tolkien class, and if people want to check it out, I have a blog for the students they're writing in. It's Tolkien Medieval and Modern .blogspot.com. And one of the major, so one of the major things that people know about Tolkien is he says he disliked allegory, he much prefers history, real or feigned. And then you realize history, real or feigned, he also conflates with myth, particularly in his Notion papers, his time travel story, where he says, he has a character saying, if you go back, the further back in time you go, you find history becoming more mythical. What it is he wants you to recognize, and myth in his understanding does this, that we are part of that same story, right? This is the Augustinian recognition that in our conversion, in our catechism, we're told the story of creation to redemption, and then our entry into it is to recognize ourselves in that story, right? We're part of this story, the church. And it's like, it feels mythological. We live in the myth. And Tolkien pointed to that too. He's saying that, the great fairy story is, of course, the Gospels, and it's the fairy story on which all others are modeled. So with Draco Alchemicus, we're playing very much in Tolkien's mode of trying to write a story that has historical grounding, but that it shows you how in history there's this transcendent referent for you constantly as well.
So fun. The further back you go, what is it? History becomes myth. What a great way to.
Yeah.
Okay, we have to close our segment and move on to the next one, Dr. Rachel. But where can folk find you online and get a copy of the second episode in your series?
So dragoncommonroom.com is our website, and you can find there the books. You can find links to our Mosaic Arc podcast, and hopefully links to all the other stuff that I've referenced. I've done a number of backstory pieces on my Fencing Barrett Prayer blog if you want to know what the layers are in these stories. So yeah, hopefully people would be intrigued.
Friends, there you go. Head over and have a look at Dr. Rachel's website. You said it was dragons, plural?
Just
Dragons
one,
Common Room?
Dragon Common Room.
One. There you go. Yeah, I remember hearing that website name and I thought, okay, I've got to meet this person. We've got to be friends because that sounds awesome.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank